All right. Well, welcome back to the next episode of the Entrepreneur to Employer podcast. So, as I've been talking about in the first 26 episodes, as we move into 2023, we're going to start adding handpicked guests to the show, guests that have a certain level of experience, expertise, and value that will help entrepreneurs, business owners, anybody that oversees a team understand and be able to improve their people operations. So on today's episode, I am happy to bring on Patricia Ortega, who has tremendous amount of experience in career coaching, and I'm going to let her tell you all about her background and experience, but I'm super excited to have you on the show today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. So my name is Patricia. I am the owner operator of The Uncommon Career. I am a career coach helping faith-driven professionals to find the job that they love and make a good living while they're doing it. And as part of my background, I started working in education, and originally my introduction to career counseling and career coaching was in 2008, right after the crash. So
Oh
I got to
boy.
help. It was a lot of it was a lot of fun, and because it was so rewarding helping people find these new avenues and sort of like start fresh and have that threat become an opportunity. And so that's where I got my start, is helping folks to sort of like reinvent themselves during the time when everything just kind of went sour in 2008, 2009. And so then from there, I started working on the mindset piece, helping engineering students to sort of, they're all underrepresented students. And so a lot of times there's a lot of barriers there. And so there's a lot of resiliency and mindset work, and then helping them to get into their first career positions and get top dollar for those. And then I went on to become a faculty at a community college where I focused on career planning. And because it's a community college, I got to meet folks from all walks of life, from CEOs to folks who had just gotten out of the incarceration system, to folks who were making major career changes, just all over the board, which gives me a lot of good experience. And so eventually I quit that position to help other folks do, continue to change careers.
Good for you. So one thing I know about you is faith is a very important part of what you do. So how does that tie into what you're doing? How does that help the foundation?
Yeah. So sometimes it's difficult to connect like career and faith. Like you
Mm-hmm.
typically don't see those two together. But one of the things that happened with me is I had this really rough childhood. And so growing up, I got to a point where I was at my first professional interview or semi-professional interview, and I had just the weight of the world on my back, just from, things that had happened in my life.
Life. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just the stuff that we all go through. And so I go into this interview and I'm so stinking nervous. I'm like shaking. And I know everyone gets nervous, but this was like a whole other level. Okay. So if you're listening and you're nervous at interviews, this
It's
was going to
normal,
make you feel
right?
good about yourself.
All right.
Yeah. So I go in there and I literally had so much pressure, and they asked me one question. It was this slim, sophisticated lady and this tall man in a suit. And of course, I'm this like, young, impressionable, and so I'm already intimidated. And in a very soft voice, very kind voice, the very sophisticated lady says, "Tell me about yourself." And I didn't hear that. I didn't see the kindness. What I saw is, "Tell me about yourself." And I'm like, "Do you want
So
to
you
know that
received
I'm?"
it differently than what you think she intended.
Oh, absolutely. And it
Okay.
wasn't that I thought she was a bad person, but all I heard was, "Tell me about yourself." Basically, I can see you, all the stuff you went through. I can see that you're probably practically homeless. I can see
Wow.
that your mom has a mental illness. I can see this, and that. That's what I felt. And I just fell apart. Like I just started crying, which is funny to me now, but it wasn't funny in the
Yeah,
moment.
could appreciate that.
And so I literally compose myself, or I go into the elevator because obviously I didn't get the job. I'm in the elevator and I'm literally hyperventilating in the elevator. And that was the moment when I realized, if I don't figure this out, I'm always going to be just surviving. I've got to
Right.
figure out a way to like move up in my career, to make my skill set something that helps me to kind of climb the ladder type of deal. And so that was like the moment where I realized career and mindset came together.
Okay.
But later on in my career, I gave my life to Christ, and, you know, the Lord is gentle but he does ask things of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so he would start asking me things like, I want you to tie it. And I'd be like, no, I need to pay my car payment, but I just saw what it says in Malachi, and it's not a this for that, but he proved faithful. Like he asked me to tithe. I didn't have the money, but I was like, okay, I gave my life to you. So that includes my money. So I started tithing, and he just gave me this amazing position, teaching. And that was the first time I had ever taught. And I was
Okay.
like, wow, that's thank you, Lord. Like, you're so faithful. Well, then he's like, okay, I'm going to do you one better. Now, do you trust me? Quit your job because I've got a counseling position for you. And at the time it was dry as a bone. One position in like Central California, and I'm in Southern California. So
Right.
one position in Central California, I had to drive hundreds of miles to interview with 400 other candidates. I mean, it
Oh
was
boy.
crazy. But I was like, well, God, I feel like you told me to quit my job. So I didn't have anything on the horizon. I quit my job. I ended up getting like a part-time $20 an hour job with a friend. And I was like, I'm going to waitress. Then what is it? Like a week or two after, or right before I'm supposed to quit my job, or before my last day, a friend's husband called me, and he's like, hey, I've got a job for you with the federal government. You don't have to worry about anything. You'll start at 80K. And I was making 30K, 35, something like that.
That's a big leap.
That's a big one. And I just stood quiet because I was like, what? And all I thought was, I'm going to get a house in Long Beach. That's all.
That was the first thing that came to mind.
I was like, I'm going to have a house in Long Beach and Huntington Beach or whatever. Because I just I never even fathomed being able to make that much money
Okay.
coming from where I came from. And so I stayed quiet. And then his response was, no, I know that's not enough money. So we're going to, and I'm like, oh my gosh, but I felt God say, this isn't what I asked you or what I told you. Do you trust me? And so against every bone in my body, I was like, I feel like God's taking me a different direction. I'm going to have to say no, which was so hard. But lo and behold, within the next year, long story short, the Lord gave me that faculty position that he had promised me. Everything, the industry opened up, and I got one of those first positions. And my salary when I quit, like 6 months ago, was 140 when you count the compensation. That was a huge jump.
It's a big number. Yeah.
And so that's where the faith in the career comes in, when I realized, okay, I've got the logistics and the pragmatic and the practical skill sets, but that takes me only so far. But when you put the faith piece in there, when you surrender everything to God, when you seek first the kingdom of God and let him provide everything else for you, I mean, life has just become this wild ride that's beyond my wildest expectations, where there's just nothing like it. And salary or no salary, it's just the best thing I've seen. And I've helped other people in their career process as well. And it's just such a blessing to know that you're right at the center of God's will.
That's great. What a great story. So, and you're following your why to a T.
Yes. Amen to that.
All
Absolutely.
right. Well, excellent. All right. Well, let's get into some questions. I'd like to ask you some questions. And what I want to talk about is, it's important for employers to be able to understand candidates better, to be able to understand what they're looking for, what their expectations are now, especially coming through what we've been through over the past couple of years, right? Expectations have changed. And so being able to have that conversation and get employers to take a step back and look at that, and even for them to be willing to put themselves in candidates' shoes. I think if we can communicate that and coach and guide employers on that, they can then in turn improve their hiring process, improve how they package offers, improve how they build jobs. I think there's a lot of things that will flow from that if we can really give them some insight to what candidates are thinking and wanting today. So, and I think you have a pulse on that. So I'd love to get into that next, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So my first question is, what are the top 2 to 3 things that you see candidates are expecting from their next employer?
Probably the first thing that comes to my mind is the word flexibility.
Okay.
We used to, if you talk to baby boomers, if you talk to folks who have been in the industry a little bit longer, you're going to hear things like, number one, you don't talk about your salary. You just never share your salary. Whereas now the younger generation is very open about their salary.
Right.
That's one point of like flexibility there, in terms of being willing and able to have an honest conversation about what that salary looks like. And then, at the same time, there's flexibility in other ways. For example, the whole idea of remote, hybrid, in-person
Mhm.
work, how much you travel, what hours you work, that's becoming
Mhm.
huge,
Yes.
having more autonomy in your work
Mhm.
and giving folks the creativity to get you the end product without necessarily having as much micromanaging as there was in the past.
Mhm.
Those are two to three of like the biggest things that I've seen is just improved flexibility and more of like a natural flow to the work progress.
Right. Excellent. Employers, I hope you're listening to this. That's important. The other thing that also comes up a lot, especially employers and business leaders that are a little more seasoned,
Mm-hmm.
they get nervous when they look at younger candidates and they see that, every couple of years they've changed jobs, they've changed companies. And, a lot of it is because, they can stay at a company and get maybe a 2 or 3% raise, or they can make a transition and get a 15 or 20% bump, right? So they're moving around every couple of years because they're driving their income up this way.
Yeah.
And a lot of employers don't understand that or appreciate that. But what can you tell employers from a candidate's perspective? Should they be worried about candidates that have moved around a lot and the thought process behind that?
I think this is even larger than the candidate and larger than the employer. This is like a
Mm,
factor of globalization, of the technology movement. I mean, everything's moving at a faster pace, including the pace of the change that takes place. And so salary is one piece of it, absolutely. And it is true. And I got to be honest, I tell my clients all the time, if what you're looking for is a raise, if
mm,
what you're looking for is a raise, then you probably do want to change positions.
mm.
However, a lot of you'll notice like the van movement,
Yes.
minimalism,
Yes.
essentialism, right?
Working
These
from the beach.
working from the beach, like all these mindset shifts from got to make more money to, I mean, it's definitely there, but now there's this like quality of life.
Hmm.
There's this natural and genuine connection they're seeking at the workforce. There's this concept of my work family, that whole piece. And so yes, I do think salary is an important factor, and employers should be more open to the salary conversations, especially when you compare the cost of a new employee, right? The cost
Hmm.
of turnover versus the cost of, giving an employee a raise.
Yeah,
And
retention.
yeah, the retention, the historical knowledge,
Hmm.
the impact they're going to make when
Hmm.
they build momentum at the same company. And so all of these things kind of get taken into consideration. Um, but at the same time, it's the fact that there are many employees out there who will stay and won't take that 10K raise because they'll say, okay, this place gives me everything I need to live the life that I want.
Hmm.
It gives me enough of a salary, but it also gives me the flexibility, the appreciation, the culture, which is huge. I mean, being able to go to work in a place where you're not stressed, where you don't have the classic toxic boss situation
Right.
going on.
Right.
I mean, we value lifestyle so much more now than we used to before. My father was very much like, you work every single day, and if there was an eighth day, you would work that eighth day
Okay. Yep.
too.
Yep.
And so now it's very different. You've got folks
Hmm.
giving up salary in order to work less hours so they can do the things with their
They
family.
want to do.
So
Yeah.
it's definitely a balance, but some things to consider.
Okay. Well, that's great insight. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the next question I have for you is, how can candidates and how can employers receive this information? Right. There are a lot of people that make transitions from industry to industry. We always talk about having those transferable skill sets, right? You
Mm-hmm.
build a set of skills, both hard and soft skills, that will work in other industries. Yes, there's going to be a learning curve to learning that new industry, but how can candidates and how can employers receive this information to help make that transition on, yes, my transferable skills can actually add value to your organization?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, I think each of the two parties, the employer and the candidate, want to take responsibility for their own portion. So as a candidate, it
Hmm.
is, their responsibility to translate, if you will, from one industry to another, because an employer doesn't have knowledge of every industry. They have a knowledge of their industry. And
Right.
sometimes almost in a silo because we work
Mhm.
only in those areas. So it's a candidate's responsibility to meet them halfway. And on the employer side, it's this idea that skill sets are they're kind of connected. When I used to
Mhm.
teach college classes, I would show every single subject, And I can
Okay.
draw a line between any one subject and any other subject. Math and philosophy they are so connected. Like math came out of philosophy because philosophy is a part
Right.
of logic,
Mm-hmm.
right? So now you can connect philosophy to engineering, right? So if you have a philosopher, they can poke holes in every single engineering problem. But when you look at art's connected to both math, engineering, and philosophy, right? There's connections amongst all of them. And especially as you get into those higher level positions, that higher level thinking, having those diverse types of skill sets can be a real asset. And it's just a matter of figuring out, okay, what's the certificate or the additional education or the skills gap that we are going to need to bridge in order to make this a viable hire.
Right.
And so that's one of the pieces that's really important, because oftentimes, I always say it's like you've got a box of blue crayons. So if you're an employer, imagine that you have all blue crayons. How
Mm-hmm.
valuable is it to
Right.
hire that one red crayon?
Mm-hmm.
Right? No one else can paint that rose. So if you come across a rose and that's what you have, you want to look for a red crayon, not a blue crayon.
That's a great, and I'm going to steal that analogy. I like that analogy.
Take it.
So no, that's great, because from the employer's perspective with the onboarding, right? That's why we encourage companies to do a detailed job analysis before they go out to hire and map out the hard skills and the soft skills that are required, figure out what the deal breakers are, and then figure out, right, what can I live, if this candidate doesn't, because there's no such thing as an ideal candidate. You and I could go apply for jobs tomorrow in our field with all of our experience. We still will not be viewed as an ideal candidate because it just doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Right. But mapping out what skills you have to have and what skills you're willing to allow to develop as that person comes in, then allows you to bring somebody in that may come from another industry. So
absolutely. Honestly, what you're saying right now, it's just like music to my ears. It's this whole concept, right? Candidate and employer should both have the must-have, the deal breakers, and the desirables. And they both kind of come together in this like combination of they each meet each other's like required, right? And the other part that, it's a little bit of a bone to pick that I'm like, is when you see job applications that they have requirements that are either unreasonable, like a technology that hasn't existed for the amount of time that they're asking for.
Right. Yeah.
Or when their requirements, and it's difficult. It's we're all humans here, so it's hard to do this well, right? But the requirements don't necessarily reflect what the job requires. It's more what the boss would like to get the best candidate. But now you're kind of like pushing candidates away who could be
alienating 100%. You are alienating people. Yep.
Yeah. So being really honest about what truly is required and what is desired is going to help a lot of those really good candidates get into the pool.
Absolutely. Love that. All right. We touched on this a little bit, but how important is it today to candidates and employees finding a place with the culture they're looking for and that flexibility?
I want to say and you hear this a lot, but there's a reason why you hear it. That culture is everything.
Yeah.
Especially now that you've got so many companies being so public about mission driven, and not every mission is
core values and
yes, right? All of that is so important. And it's important because right now companies are making decisions based on those values even more than they ever have. Before, the bottom line is what drove the decision making. Now it's the values and the mission, and it's being done very publicly. And so employees need to know what company they're going into, that their values align, because it's win-win if your values align. But if it doesn't align, and as an employee, I see this all the time as a candidate, you go into the process and you really want a job. So you sort of make yourself, you
fit into that box.
Peg.
Yep. You're gonna make it work.
You make it work, and you're like, oh, well, this is kind of questionable for me. It doesn't really align with my values, but I really need a job. And so you go to that job. And those are the employees that are doing the quiet quitting. Those are the employees that just don't really like, what's happening. And so they just job hop or whatnot, and so on the employer side, it's the same thing. If what you're valuing is, oh, I want the most qualified candidate with the highest level of experience, but you don't look at that mission oriented piece. You don't ask questions about, what are your values? Where do you
Right.
get to know them as a person? Then they might lose out on seeing the real diamond of a candidate that's going to be a good fit for them.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point. I mean, yes, companies have, especially for-profit companies and publicly traded, the focus has always been the financials, right? And financial metrics and KPIs. But there is a shift in the marketplace where the focus is the core values, guiding the company by the core values, hiring, firing, and everything in between, how we treat customers, how we treat our clients, everything is driven from the core value perspective.
Yeah.
And when those things line up, the financials are a byproduct of that, right? Revenue is a byproduct of that, right? It's a byproduct of doing good work. Peter Drucker, he said that culture trumps, right? Culture trumps strategy all day long.
Yep. All day.
So yeah, or eats strategy for breakfast, I think is the exact
Is that
quote.
what he said? Well,
I think that's the exact quote. So yeah, so it's very true.
It's true.
Yeah.
And it's, years prior, before all this, like, folks didn't really connect the dots. Culture wasn't valued. You just get the work done. But it's like the whole world is changing, right? The generation of candidates is changing, but also what you see on the employer side is changing too. So, it's important to evaluate as an employer and as a candidate where you are in that process to make sure you're in the same place that the rest of the market's in.
Exactly. This wasn't on my question list, but I'm going to bring it up because you touched on it. This whole concept of quiet quitting, right? Which is not a new concept. It's just a rebranded concept, right?
Yep.
But is it just employees saying, I'm going to pull back and do just what I'm paid for and stop going over and above? Or is there something more to this whole quiet quitting thing?
I think on one side, I feel like there's a lot of things contributing to this, with the fact that everyone's saying, oh, quiet quitting. And it happened right after the pandemic. Part of it, I think, has to do with the idea that, we all were kind of forced in a way to go online, and it sounded great, right? Like, I get to work at home. I get to be in my PJs.
Yeah. Just a dress shirt from top up.
Okay, I'm not the only one. But that's, it sounded excellent. And it is a good thing to have more life balance, right? But at the same time, most companies and most institutions, we weren't ready for that. And so as humans, not all of us, but many of us thrive most under the right boundaries, the right structures, the right standards, like we know and things are clear. And when we went online, there was just a lack of clarity across the board.
Right.
And so I feel like a lot of this demotivated the employees that now were in isolation and didn't have a space to have that like momentum building camaraderie. And so I think that just started to build a habit. And just overall, whether you're in person or online, I think it's those, motivational pieces, not to get too like frou-frou, right? But like those motivational pieces of like, you're a human, I'm a human, let's be human together. Let's hold each other accountable in a healthy way. And I think those are the things that stop that from happening. And the other thing comes back to the culture and the values and the fact that many companies got so vocal about their values, almost without, I don't want to say without the consent of the employees, but it was like this thing where like the companies were moving faster than the employees.
Right.
And now you've got some employees that are like, I didn't sign up for this.
Yeah, there's some disconnects out there for sure.
Yeah.
I love your insight. All right. Well, final thoughts. From what you see going on out there, do you see 100% remote staying? Do you see hybrids coming back, or do you see all in person? Where do you think this is all headed with this next generation of a workforce?
Honestly, I think we're headed towards just a whole lot more flexibility in what work looks like. I think a lot of companies would be very smart to identify like their musts and their desirables in terms of format. What roles and what departments have to be in person, what departments can do with a monthly meeting in person, and what departments can go completely online. You see a lot of customer service roles going completely online, right? And so, as you do those KPIs and all those outcomes and goal setting, figuring out, similar to, you might be familiar with this, when you run an ad for online business, you do A/B testing.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, okay, let's do these two things and change one aspect at a time. Which one works better? And I think it is going to take the most successful companies are the ones that are going to lead the way in sort of doing this like experiential research, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of what works best
Testing.
for each type of role.
Yep.
So that's what I'm thinking. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like even the roles that are 100% remote, and as a career coach, I don't know if some candidates might not agree with me, but my unpopular opinion is that even in roles that are 100% remote, it would be beneficial to have at least one, maybe two meetings a year where everyone comes together in the same place.
I agree with you on
paid
that.
would
Yes.
be ideal. Because then it just
There's
helps
value
you
in that.
remember.
There's
Yes.
value in that. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I agree with
Absolutely.
you. I agree with that unpopular opinion 100%.
Yeah.
So the other thing too is, don't bring employees into the office just to stick them on Zoom meetings, right? I mean,
Yes.
if you're going to have a hybrid work schedule, right, make sure that when they come in the office, it's for a very specific reason that moves them forward as well as the organization, not just to get on a Zoom call with somebody else. They can do that from their
Absolutely.
remote office.
Yes.
So,
yes. And that takes planning, right? That takes time on the front end. And
right.
so as employers, you got to be willing to do that work on the front end to have the benefits, it'll just pay off exponentially.
100%. Well, I could discuss this with you for hours, but we definitely need to wrap it up. So your insight has been very valuable. I know our listeners are going to get some great feedback out of this and some great value and things that they can apply to their business. So if anybody wants to connect with you, how can they find you?
Yeah, I'm over at theuncommoncareer.com. I've got a podcast. It's The Uncommon Career. It's the career podcast for Christians. You can also find me on a brand new YouTube channel at the handle is The Uncommon Career.
Awesome. And we will make sure to have those links in our show notes so that people can find you that way as well and click on the links. So Patricia, thank you again for being on the Entrepreneur to Employer podcast. I've enjoyed the conversation and I look forward to doing it again.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
You too.